There is a paradox of faith many of us were never taught to expect. As you grow deeper in faith, God often speaks less, not more. And it is that silence that makes you think you are lost. But Scripture does not call this being lost. Scripture calls it being led in a new way. You remember, don't you? There was a time when you prayed and the answer came quickly, clearly, almost unmistakably. But then one day you prayed the same way and heaven seemed to close. No signs, no emotions, no familiar whisper, only silence. And you began to wonder, is God still guiding me? I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. The psalmist writes Psalm 32:8, but Scripture never says God instructs us the same way forever. The same God, yes, but not the same method for every season of faith. Paul makes this clear. When I was a child, I thought like a child, but when I became an adult, I put the ways of childhood behind me. 1 Corinthians 13:11. That includes how we hear God. Perhaps you are not confused. Perhaps you are being trained. Perhaps God is no longer speaking to you through external signs, because he is teaching you inner discernment. Not because he is farther away, but because he is entrusting you with more. If you feel uncertain right now, do not panic. Do not run back to what once felt familiar, just to feel safe. Be still, listen differently, and dare to believe this. God's guidance looks unfamiliar today because you are no longer who you used to be. This is not a moment to retreat. This is a moment to step forward in mature faith and allow God to lead you the way he always intended for this season. Level 1, rules before relationship. When God leads you step by step. Here is a quiet truth. Many believers misunderstand at the beginning of faith. God often starts by telling you what to do before he teaches you who he is. That sounds backward to modern ears, but it is deeply biblical. In the early stages of faith, God does not overwhelm you with mystery. He gives you clarity, not because rules are the goal, but because rules are the guardrails. At level 1, faith asks simple questions. What is right? What is wrong? What should I avoid? What should I obey? And God answers those questions plainly. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119, 105. Notice the image. A lamp does not light the whole road. It lights the next step. That is how God guides beginners. One clear step at a time. Many people look back on this stage and feel embarrassed by it. They say things like, my faith was so rigid back then, but Scripture never mocks early obedience. In fact, God honors it. Jesus himself said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. John 14:15. Obedience is not immaturity. It is the language of new love. At this level, God often speaks through clear instructions. Scripture, counsel, boundaries, do's and don'ts. Not because he wants control, but because he is protecting something fragile. A young faith needs structure the way a child needs rules. Freedom too early can destroy what is still forming. That is why God told Israel exactly where to walk, what to eat, when to stop, and how to worship. Before intimacy came identity. Before relationship came rhythm. But here is the reversal. Many miss. Needing rules does not mean you lack faith. It means you are learning trust. Proverbs says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Proverbs 3:6. Straight paths come before deep conversations. Direction comes before discernment. If this is where you are, if your faith feels structured, careful, even a little black and white, do not despise it. God is not disappointed in you. He is walking beside you, pointing to the ground, saying, step here, not there, one step at a time. That is not distance, that is nearness. But hear this gently, rules are not the destination. They are the doorway. The same God who leads you step by step will one day teach you to walk by discernment, not checklists. So obey fully but hold humbly. Let the rules shape you without replacing relationship. If you are at level 1, your calling is simple and holy. Be faithful with the step in front of you. Do not rush ahead. Do not compare yourself to others. Walk, listen, obey, and trust that the God who leads you clearly today is preparing you to know him more deeply tomorrow. Level 2. Signs before certainty. When God speaks through circumstances, there is a stage of faith where obedience is no longer enough. You want confirmation. You believe God leads, but you still ask, "Can you show me?" And here is the paradox. God often answers that prayer, even though it is not how he plans to lead you forever. Signs are not weakness, they are training tools. At level 2, faith begins to look outward. You start watching doors open and close. You read meaning into timing, coincidences, unexpected encounters. And Scripture shows us this is not foolish faith. It is biblical. Gideon laid out the fleece and asked God for a sign, not once but twice. And God answered him. Judges 6:36-40. Not because Gideon was strong, but because he was afraid and still willing to obey. God uses circumstances because they are visible, tangible, reassuring. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Psalm 37:23. At this level, those steps often come with evidence you can see, provision arriving at the last moment, obstacles suddenly removed, resistance appearing just when you were about to move. Heaven seems to speak through the environment around you. But this stage carries a quiet danger. When signs become your primary language with God, confusion grows the moment circumstances shift. Doors that were open close, favor turns into delay, and you begin to wonder, did I miss God? Scripture gently warns us here. We live by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. Signs can confirm faith, but they cannot replace it. Here is the reversal that reshapes everything. God uses signs to build your confidence, not to carry your discernment. Training wheels help you ride, but they were never meant to steer the bicycle. God allows visible confirmation so you learn to move forward without panic. But he will not let circumstances become your master. If you are at level 2, God is teaching you something vital, obedience, even when the signs are unclear. You are learning that an open door does not always mean go, and a closed door does not always mean stop. Sometimes a closed door is protection. Sometimes resistance is preparation. As Scripture says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. Do not despise this stage. God is patient with your questions. He knows you are still learning how to walk without needing to see the entire path. But hear his invitation. Do not demand certainty before obedience. Let signs encourage you, but let trust move you. If you feel stuck, waiting for one more confirmation, one more signal from heaven, this may be your moment to grow. Take the step God has already made clear. Walk forward, even when circumstances are mixed, because the God who once spoke through signs is preparing you to hear him, even when the signs fade. Level 3. Conviction before clarity. When God leads you from within, there comes a moment in faith when God stops explaining himself and starts shaping your discernment. This is the paradox of level 3. You receive less information, but more certainty. Not the loud certainty of signs or rules, but the quiet weight of conviction. You cannot always explain it. You just know. At this stage, God's guidance moves inward. No fleece on the ground. No dramatic open doors. Instead, a steady inner witness that refuses to leave you alone. Scripture calls this the work of the Spirit. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit. Romans 8:16. Notice where the testimony happens. Not around you but within you. God begins to lead you through an awakened conscience, a trained heart, a sensitivity that grows sharper with obedience. This is where faith becomes deeply personal and sometimes deeply lonely. You may sense resistance in your spirit even when everything looks right on the outside. The opportunity is good. The timing is perfect. Everyone agrees. Yet something inside you tightens, and you don't know how to justify it. Proverbs speaks directly to this moment. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. At level 3, God is teaching you that your heart, when surrendered, can become a place of guidance. Here is the reversal. Most believers struggle with. God's voice often grows quieter as your discernment grows stronger. Elijah learned this when God was not in the wind, the earthquake or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:11-12. Loud signs are no longer necessary when your spirit has learned to recognize his presence. God is not withdrawing, he is refining. But this level requires courage, because conviction without clarity can feel risky. You may disappoint people. You may walk away from things you cannot logically explain. And yet Jesus promised, "My sheep hear my voice." John 10:27. He did not say they would always understand it, only that they would recognize it. If this is where you are, God is inviting you into deeper trust. Not trust in outcomes, not trust in appearances, trust in alignment. You are learning to value obedience over explanation, faithfulness over approval. This is where spiritual maturity begins to show, not in confidence but in restraint. So if something feels off, and you can't explain why, don't rush past it. Pray, wait, test it against Scripture. Listen, conviction is not confusion. It is guidance still forming words. And when you obey at this level, even quietly, even imperfectly, God trains your heart to hear him more clearly than ever before. This is your invitation. Stop demanding clarity before obedience. Honor the conviction God has placed within you. Step forward with humility and courage, because the God who is leading you from within is preparing you to trust him, even when the path ahead remains unseen. Level 4. Silence before trust. When God stops explaining and starts training. There is a level of faith that feels like punishment, but is actually promotion. It begins with a sentence no believer wants to hear. God goes silent. Not angry silence, not distant silence, but the kind that removes explanations and leaves you alone with obedience. This is the paradox of level 4. When God trusts you more, he often explains himself less. Up to this point, guidance had texture, rules, signs, convictions, something to respond to. But now, nothing. You pray, and heaven feels closed. You search Scripture, and no verse jumps out. You wait for peace, and it does not arrive on command. And the question grows louder. Did I do something wrong? Scripture answers gently but firmly. No. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Psalm 37:7. Stillness is not abandonment, it is positioning. This is the stage where God trains trust, not decision-making. Abraham knew this silence when he walked up Mount Moriah without a word from God, carrying a promise that looked like a contradiction. Job lived here when heaven said nothing while everything was taken. Even Jesus entered this place. My God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew 27:46. Silence has always been part of sacred formation. Here is the reversal that changes everything. Silence is not the absence of guidance, it is the absence of reassurance. God has already spoken enough. Now he watches what you will do with what you already know. Hebrews says, we walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. At level 4, sight is removed so faith can stand on its own. This level exposes motives. Do you obey only when you feel God near? Do you trust only when answers are immediate? Silence strips faith down to its core. It teaches you to anchor yourself not in what God says today, but in who he has always been. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Job 13:15. That is not desperation, that is maturity. If this is where you are, resist the urge to fill the silence with noise. Do not manufacture signs. Do not chase voices. Do not return to old methods just to feel comfort again. God is not asking you to understand. He is asking you to stand, to remain faithful when obedience feels unrewarded, to keep walking when affirmation is absent. And here is the hidden gift of this level. When trust is trained in silence, it cannot be shaken by circumstances. You no longer need God to prove himself every step of the way. You have learned his character. You know his heart. So if heaven feels quiet, do not retreat. Do not assume distance. This is not delay. This is development. Stay faithful. Stay obedient. Stay still. Because the God who stopped explaining is preparing to entrust you with something far deeper than answers. Unshakable trust. Level 5, union before instruction. When your desires begin to match God's will, there is a final stage of faith that feels almost unsettling at first. God stops telling you what to do, and yet you are not lost. This is the paradox of level 5. Guidance has not disappeared. It has become internalized. At this level, God no longer needs to direct every step, because he has been reshaping the one who walks. This is where many believers misunderstand maturity. They assume that deeper faith means more instructions, clearer signals, constant confirmation. But Scripture reveals the opposite. Jesus said, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you." John 15:4. He did not say, "Ask me about every move." He said, "Abide." At level 5, guidance flows not from commands, but from union. Here something profound has happened. Your desires have been trained, your instincts have been softened, your will has been surrendered and slowly reformed. David captured this mystery when he wrote, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." Psalm 37:4. This is not God granting selfish wishes. This is God shaping your heart until what you want begins to reflect what he wants. At this level, believers often say less about finding God's will and more about being faithful in God's presence. Decisions no longer feel paralyzing. Fear of choosing wrong fades, not because mistakes are impossible, but because trust is secure. As Paul wrote, "It is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose." Philippians 2:13. Notice the order. God works in your will before your actions. Here is the great reversal. The highest level of guidance looks like freedom, not independence from God, but intimacy with him. You are no longer driven by anxiety over outcomes. You are anchored in relationship. You do not need constant reassurance, because you know the one you walk with. like Enoch, who walked faithfully with God. Genesis 5:24. Your life becomes direction itself. But this level carries weight. Union brings responsibility. When your desires align with God's heart, your choices matter deeply, not just for you, but for others. This is why few reach this place, not because God withholds it, but because it requires long obedience, deep surrender, and the willingness to let God change, not just your actions, but your wants. If you sense this stirring in your spirit, this quiet alignment, this steady peace, do not take it lightly. God is inviting you into a life where obedience is no longer forced, and faith is no longer fragile. He is calling you to live from intimacy, not instruction. So step forward, not anxiously, but confidently. Keep abiding, keep listening, keep walking. Because when your heart is united with God's, His will no longer feels distant. It lives within you. Conclusion. Different guidance doesn't mean distance, it means growth. Here is the final paradox of faith. When God's guidance changes, many assume His presence has faded, but Scripture tells a truer story. God does not grow distant as you mature. He grows more trusting. What feels unfamiliar is not abandonment, it is formation. Across every level, one truth remains steady. The same God is leading you, just not the same way. He once used rules to protect you, then signs to steady you, then conviction to refine you, then silence to strengthen you, and finally, union to transform you. None of these stages replace the others. They build upon them. As the writer of Hebrews reminds us, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13:8. The guide does not change. The guided does. If you are struggling to hear God the way you once did, resist the urge to panic. Resist the temptation to regress. Paul's words are gentle but firm. He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. Philippians 1:6. God does not start a work only to abandon it halfway. What He changes with purpose. So ask a better question. Not, why does God feel different? But what is God growing in me now? Because growth often removes comforts before it reveals capacity, and faith that matures learns to walk without constant reassurance. We walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. Not because sight is wrong, but because trust has learnt to stand. Let this truth settle your heart. Different guidance does not mean distance. It means depth. It means God sees you as capable of more discernment, more responsibility, more intimacy. Do not measure God's nearness by volume. Measure it by faithfulness. Now is your invitation. Wherever you find yourself, rules, signs, conviction, silence, or union, step forward without fear. Be faithful where you are. Walk with humility. Trust the God who knows how to lead you in every season, and allow your changing journey to become the very evidence that you are growing, not drifting.